How widespread is the threat of Shariah? I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Today we're going to be talking about Shariah with a special guest, Eric Stakelback. And Eric is a correspondent on terrorism with CBN, headquartered out of Washington, D.C. Welcome to Faith and Freedom.
Matt, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, you wrote a book called The Terrorist Next Door, How the Government is Deceiving You About the Islamic Threats. And tell us a little bit about what it is. First of all, your background, how you got into this, and then what are the threats that we're facing here in America?
Well, Matt, the book, first of all, is based on my on-the-ground experiences. For the past 10 years, I've been in the mosques. I've been in the Islamic enclaves in America, in Europe, from coast to coast. I've interviewed radical Imams. I've interviewed Islamic terrorists with links to al-Qaeda. So after doing this for 10 years, compiling all this information, not from me, but from their own mouths, their own words, I said, hey, I have so much information here I need to share. Decided to put it in one volume, The Terrorist Next Door. And I think the thing that sets it apart, again, is my on-the-ground experiences. It's not me saying it. It's them. So I'm giving a bird's-eye view. So that's where the book is. Now, I've been doing this for 10 years. Getting here has been a wild ride. I started out, believe it or not, in sports writing. They say, write what you know. Well, I played basketball growing up, and I always knew I wanted to be a journalist, but I also grew up with a strong interest in foreign policy, in politics, in Israel. My father was a Christian Zionist before I even knew what the term meant. Grew up in Philadelphia in a working-class area, working-class neighborhood. But I was probably the only kid in my neighborhood who knew the names Yoni Netanyahu, who knew about the Entebbe raid, who was sitting around the dinner table having conversations about Stalingrad and King David. My father was a paratrooper in the 101st Airborne, so he instilled that passion in me. So even though I was dabbling in sports writing, I always had this passion and this interest in foreign policy, particularly the Middle East. And when 9/11 happened, it changed a lot of our worlds. It changed my worlds. I threw everything I could I just immersed myself in this. And ever since then, it's been my passion. I live and breathe it. Not always the most pleasant subject matter, but it's got to be done.
So you're a correspondent with CBN, and you do this around the world now, and one of your specialties is in terrorism and in the Islamic threat. You're also a correspondent for GBTV, Glenn Beck, a new TV program. And you also obviously appear on many other programs such as Fox News and so forth. So you've been on the ground actually interviewing terrorists. Now, when you say you interviewed terrorists, are you talking about terrorists that advocate strapping bombs on their back, that have been part of jihadism and killing innocent civilians, killing innocent individuals?
Matt, I have. I know it's hard to believe, but I'll give you an example. London, or as I call it, Londonistan, which is what it's become. Last year, I sat in the living room of a guy named Saad al-Faqih. Now, this is a guy that the U.S. Treasury Department has designated as a global terrorist. Well, I shared tea and Arab pastries with him in his living room last year. Pretty interesting, when I came into his home, the first thing he said was, "You just missed the British police. There's an assassination plot against my life. They just left." I said, well, I guess I won't be sitting near the window today during our conversation. But in all seriousness, this was a very bad guy, and this was an associate of Osama bin Laden. Yet he is living in London, a free man, collecting welfare benefits from the government. So, very bad guy, al-Qaeda ideologue, runs al-Qaeda websites.
So he's collecting welfare benefits from the government.
Oh, yeah.
And as part of that, he doesn't have to do any work for his own support, and therefore he has all the time in the world to plot terrorist attacks in Europe and around the world.
And Matt, I have to say, he lives in a very nice home in northwest London. But in getting in...
So that obviously is not necessarily coming from the welfare benefits. He's getting sources of income some other places as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He's in constant contact with his associates around the world. But talking to him, and I think that's the key point here, I was able to get a window into the mindset of how these guys think. And I have to tell you, and for our listeners, this is the key point. It's not poverty. It's not even the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It is the ideology. There is a well-defined ideology. And frankly, let's lay all the cards on the table. It's Islamic ideology. It's Islamic teachings. It is the Quran. It is the Hadiths. This is what they are citing. They are doing this because their core texts And the example of the Prophet Muhammad tells them to do this. Now, I know this is very politically incorrect, but I'm just telling you what they tell me.
So they are committed to the Quran and to the teachings of the Quran.
Absolutely.
And they believe strongly in that, and therefore they are compelled by that particular belief to carry out those particular dictates. Now, some people say, well, but Islam is a religion of peace. George W. Bush said that when he was president of the United States. And for various texts that say, go out and kill the infidel, there's others that say something opposite. How do you respond?
Matt, here's the key point here. Well, first of all, I respond in terms of Islam as a religion of peace. There's no way any intellectually honest individual can say that Islam is a religion of peace. And God bless George W. Bush, a good man. I don't know how much he studied the topic before he said that. But no intellectually honest individual can say that Islam is a religion of peace for three reasons. Number one, as I said, the core text of Islam, the Quran, the Hadiths, are littered with violence. Number two, Islam's history is littered with bloodshed and conquest. And number three, the example of Islam's Prophet Muhammad. Look, even Muslims will tell you this was a warrior. So take those three factors. I don't see how you could say that Islam is a religion of peace. Now, in terms of the peaceful verses in the Quran, and they are there. There absolutely are peaceful verses that encourage men to do good, Muslims to do good. Here's a key point, Matt, that people need to remember. There's a concept in Islam called abrogation. Now, what that is, not to get too in the weeds, but what abrogation is it cancels out any of Muhammad's earlier revelations. Long story short, early on in his prophetic career.
So the later writings cancel out the former writings if they are in conflict.
That's right, man.
And the later writings trump the former.
That's right, absolutely. Muhammad, early in his career, in the Mecca phase of his career, Muhammad didn't have the power yet. He was making conciliatory statements to Christians and Jews and said, hey, I want to bring you on board with my new religion. He was rejected, obviously, as we know, by many Christians and Jews in the Arabian Peninsula. But later on, as he gained power, as he moved to Medina, he became a political leader, a conqueror. All of a sudden, magically, his revelations about Christians and Jews began to change and become more violent and hostile.
You know, that's a fundamental point I think some people miss. And in fact, you can go to the internet and you can do a Google search for chronological Quran. Now, you may not be able to find a chronological Quran. I think the only one that I found was something that was done back in 1923. But you can find charts that will actually put in chronology for you the various surahs or those chapters. Currently, they're not organized by chronology. They're organized by length of the surah or the chapter.
Yeah, it's a tough read.
So when they're organized now out of chronology by length, then they're all mixed up. You may have something in one surah that says positive, doing good, and the other surah to kill the infidel. But if you then put them in chronology, what you're saying is that there are two different phases of his ministry, an early phase and a later phase. And the later phase begins to ultimately become more violent, and that's where you're talking about that abrogates those former passages that are in contradiction to the later ones.
Matt, you said it beautifully. And the key point to remember here is those later revelations, the final revelations in Muhammad's life, they are final. That is the final say in Islam. That is Muhammad's final say. Slay the Christians and Jews wherever you find them. That's the final say. That was never abrogated. These were his final revelations, his final words on the matter. I know it's going to shock a lot of people, but again, I'm just telling you what these core texts say, and as Matt said, you can Google it and find it out for yourself.
Well, our guest is Eric Stakelback, and it's a fascinating discussion, and we will be talking about this throughout the week on Faith and Freedom. The book that he wrote, The Terrorist Next Door, just the name of it itself makes you want to read it. The Terrorist Next Door, the subtitle is How the Government is Deceiving You About the Islamic Threat. That book, The Terrorist Next Door, you can get that at your bookstore. You can also Google it online and go to one of the online bookstores, or you can go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org. That's lc.org, and you can obtain it there for a contribution to Liberty Counsel. That's the book by Eric Stakelback, The Terrorist Next Door. Tomorrow, I want to pick up, Eric, with, after we've laid the groundwork today, I want to pick up with that interview that you did, because I'm fascinated to hear how it went and how you felt during that process. You'll want to tune in tomorrow to Faith and Freedom. Our guest will be Eric Stakelback for the rest of this program this week. Go to Liberty Counsel's website for The Terrorist Next Door.